Hi, it's Heather from Thicketworks, and today we're going to create this miniature garden door. This door consists of several layers, all of which are made possible by the Cricut Maker. Yep, I bit the bullet, I bought one, I got some accessories, and I couldn't be happier. For this project, we'll be using the knife blade and drive housing, and also the fine point blade and housing, both of which get clamped into the adaptive tool system. In order to control the Cricut Maker, you need to establish a free account at Cricut Design Space. Once you've signed into Cricut Design Space, it's time to upload and cut a project. I've created two separate SVG files that I'll be cutting today. I'm offering both of these files for free for you to download. See the link in the description. Once you've signed into Design Space, click New Project. Once I've clicked on New Project, it loads the Design Space screen, and this is divided into a grid, much like the surface of your cutting mat. In order to upload SVG files for use with the Cricut Maker, I'm clicking the upload icon on the left-hand side of the screen and then clicking Upload Image. From here, I'll click Browse and then select the file that I want to load. It shows in this preview window, and then I click Save. I'm going to upload an additional image before I begin selecting the options for making these cuts. Now, both SVG files are loaded into Design Space, and I'm going to select the more simple, heavier weight chipboard design first. This now gets loaded into Design Space, and I can make any necessary changes. Everything's fine, so I'm clicking the Make It button, and then adjusting the placement of this file on the virtual cutting mat before going on to select the Continue button. Once it recognizes my machine, it gives me the option to choose a material. For this, I'm going to be selecting Heavy Chipboard, and I'll also be setting it as a favorite by clicking the little star icon. That way, it will be easy for me to find this particular material again. And it tells me I need to load the knife blade into the clamp. When working with heavier materials like chipboard, it's important to use a strong grip mat, and this does not come standard with the Cricut Maker. It's an additional accessory. I do my best to follow the guidelines and place the chipboard precisely onto the cutting mat, pressing it firmly into place. And then additionally, for items like chipboard, it's required to add adhesive tape over all four edges of the material. This will make doubly sure that the material does not shift while it's being cut, and that's crucial to getting a good result. Now, this is the knife blade, and this will be mounted into the adaptive tool system before cutting the heavyweight chipboard. It's important to move these plastic little pressure rings to the edges of the roller bar so that they won't mark the front of my material. Turning the machine on and allowing it to initialize. This takes just a few moments. Once that's taken place, I can slip the mat into place and load it into the machine. At this point, I control the rest of the operation from within Cricut Design Space and allow the machine to do its job. Now, this is the heavier weight chipboard, and it has been cut with the knife blade. Let's see what kind of a job it did. I'm easing around the edges of the cut just to verify that it is cut cleanly, and things are looking good. So now it's a question of carefully peeling that off of the mat, and then we'll remove the interior rectangles that have been cut from within each of these panels. Pretty clean. There's a little bit of sticking at the corners, but not bad at all. Now that these heavy door panels have been cut, it's time to work on the more intricate design. This gets loaded into Design Space, and the Attach button at the bottom of the Layers panel is selected so that the pattern retains its integrity. Then we click Make It and adjust the positioning before clicking Continue. Once the device is detected, we're given the option to select the material. I'm clicking Browse All Materials, and then I'm clicking Light Chipboard and marking it as a favorite. Now I'll load in the fine point blade and I'll load the mat. And with fingers crossed, I wait with a bit of agitated anticipation to see whether or not this machine can handle this more intricate design out of lightweight chipboard. It takes a little less time than I had anticipated for the cut to complete. It was less than 10 minutes, which is pretty good for something this elaborate. Now I'm gently pressing from the back to help release the edges of all of these cuts, and then very carefully lifting the chipboard away from the sticky surface of the mat. I'm pleasantly surprised to find that this first framework detaches easily. There's a little point in one of the lower corners where it didn't cut super clean, but I love the fact that these tiny frames that are being detached are super sharp. Now, this is the one I was really concerned about. There are a lot of really small cuts in this particular area, and in order for the piece to be successful, they have to look good. So maybe next time I cut a design that's this elaborate, I will either increase the pressure or add an additional cutting pass so that it cuts a little more cleanly. But with some finagling, I'm able to get all of the small pieces out of the way and then play with stacking all the layers together to see what this is going to look like. Okay, so I go ahead and remove all of the rest of the pieces, and there will be a few waste pieces, but they can be used in other projects. I'm going to gather everything up and then head down to the studio where I can get really messy. I cannot wait to see how this all comes together. Okay, now it's time to start playing with all these pieces that have been cut out. I've gathered everything together and I've made a preliminary stack just to get an idea of how it's going to fit together. My first task is to create some texture on the heavyweight door panels. So I'll set the more delicate pieces aside for now and concentrate on these. I want this to be a simulated wood finish. So to begin that process, I'm going to grab a pair of wing dividers and use them to scratch in some vertical lines that hopefully will help to simulate boards in the final product. If you don't have dividers, you can achieve the same effect by scoring lightly along the surface with a craft blade held tightly against a metal ruler. Whatever it takes to get some vertical lines incised into the face of the chipboard. That's the goal. So I repeat this process on each of these panels on one side, and then I go back in with a blunted craft knife and just exaggerate those vertical lines. And yeah, sometimes my hand wanders a little bit, and yeah, sometimes I dig a little bit too deeply. That's fine with me. I'm interested in creating a really distressed result, so precision is not required. And yeah, that's a good beginning. To distress the surface even more and to attempt to simulate grain lines in the faux wood, I'm using this metal brush and just dragging it vertically along the surface. Now it's creating a little bit of fuzziness, but it's also creating a roughness, and I like that, so I'm going to continue creating this effect. There, yep, I'm liking that. To intensify it even more, I'm reaching for a Prima distressing tool and dragging it along those lines too. Before continuing, I want to harden the grill work in this flimsy, lightweight chipboard, and I'll do that by coating both sides of it with the cheapest super glue I could get my hands on. This grill is supposed to simulate some kind of metal, and by the time we finish with it, it will be extremely sturdy. Once the super glue has been applied, I set that piece aside to cure. I'm determined to have this be a real working door, so I'm working with these paper thin hinges. I love these things. But in order for them to be attached properly to the back of these thicker door panels, I have to create cutouts or divots so that they'll rest smoothly between the layers without causing a bulge. To accomplish this, I'm scoring lightly into the back of each of these chipboard panels and then carefully peeling away several layers of the chipboard until I reach a depth that allows me to place the hinge inside of this declivity. There we go, nice and smooth. That's going to work out really well. Once that's been done, I'm just going to add lots of super glue to these little cavities and then quickly place the flange of the hinge inside and then press it down until the glue begins to set. I'll throw a little weight on top to help with the process and repeat it on the other hinge, and then just let this cure. Yep, that's going to be great. This upper hinge got a little bit of super glue in it, so it's going to take some working to make sure that it hinges freely, but with a little bit of twisting back and forth, it's just fine. Now we can begin to see what this is going to look like once we layer all of the panels together. The hinge is going to be completely enclosed. I just love that. I've decided to keep it simple and use these Tim Holtz hitch fasteners as the doorknobs. Before I can determine where the hole should be placed, I need to add this framework panel on the exterior. That way I'll know precisely where to place my hole. I've chosen to use super thick tacky glue for this operation. I spread it onto the back of the framework using a palette knife and then position it and press it into place. Once it's been attached, I do my best to clean up any of the glue that has seeped out, and then I place heavy weights on top and allow it to cure. Once the framing panel has cured, I'm adding grain lines to all of the cross members. Now I can decide on the exact location of the hole so that the hitch fasteners can be mounted. And then I'm flipping the piece over and once again delaminating a portion of the chipboard so that this can be installed without creating any bulge. Once enough material has been removed for it to lie flat, I coat that inner surface with super glue and install the back of the hitch fastener. And then I just screw the knob portion onto the upper surface. Now I'm using the wing dividers and a blunted craft blade to add even more distressing to these framework panels. And then I bring out the big blade to start distressing the lower portion of each panel. This has got to be my favorite part of the whole project. And once all those cuts are in place, I harden and solidify the chipboard with a layer of super glue. Now I'm going to add heavy black gesso to the grill portion of the center panel, painting it on both sides and allowing that to dry thoroughly. As usual, I can't resist doing a dry fit at this stage. That grill is so sturdy. It already feels like metal. Let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah, that is cool. Okay, now I need to transfer the placement of that original hitch fastener onto the other panel. So to do this, I'm just adding some paint onto the back of the first hitch fastener and then pressing the two panels tightly together. This allows me to install the second hitch fastener in exactly the opposite position. I love the way this turned out with just a hint of metal peeking out along that narrow edge. Okay, so now we've got these two panels ready to go. It's time to stack everything together. Before I do that, I'm coating the interior panel with heavy black gesso and allowing it to dry. And then using the super thick tacky glue to laminate all of these panels together, placing the decorative grille against the back of one of the door panels and then sandwiching it between the other panel. Yeah, it looks a little messy at this point, but it gets better, I promise. After clamping up the edges so that it will dry straight and true, I'm going to add these additional narrow frames around the exterior of the grill. I just love the dimensionality that this adds to the piece. Tacky glue holds it in place, and I will clean up all of that squeeze out with a dampened paintbrush. I repeat this on both sides of the door. And while we're waiting for that to set up, we can continue to add additional decorative panels at the top and the bottom of each side of the door. In order to place these little panels perfectly, I leave the little frame intact and then remove it. And this leaves each of those panels perfectly centered within the aperture. I just think that's so clever, and it's one of the coolest ways that using a machine like the Cricut Maker can help to create precision in our miniatures. I've been working with electronic cutters for almost a decade now, but I am more excited by the possibilities presented by the Cricut Maker than any other cutter out there, and I have a really expensive one. It won't even achieve what this machine does. So yeah, I'm stoked. All right, I'm adding more distressing to the exterior panels. Now that those are in place, I'm trying to make it appear as though the distressing blends in naturally with what we did earlier. And yep, I'm coating the entire surface with more super glue. Now you know why I get the really cheap stuff. For the edges of the door, I'm adding a bead of super glue and then sprinkling a little bit of baking soda right over the top. You know the drill by now, guys. This is what I call Popper's Bondo. It can be sanded immediately, I mean with no waiting at all, and I love that. You may have noticed that I also used a needle file to intensify those vertical lines. And now Once everything's coated with super glue and it's dry, I'm grabbing some hairspray from the Dollar Tree. I'm putting a thick coat on both sides because I'm going to be experimenting with a chipping method that I've picked up from the model making community. Once the hairspray has dried, I'm adding cheap acrylic craft paint in 2 colors blended together for an aged and decrepit look. I love the way the blue fades into the green. I'm going to be adding 2 separate coats. Once the paint has dried comes the next step of this chipping method, where you paint water over the surface of the dried paint and then you begin to gently scrub away. The reason that I've selected this method over tried and true methods like using Vaseline, for instance, is because of the authentic chipping that it creates. I really love how this looks. It is as though it's been out in the weather for 20 years with no maintenance. And certainly you could leave it at that, but I can't leave well enough alone. So I mixed some brown and some black acrylic craft paint together with a lot of water to make a dark wash. And once I've painted it on, I'm diluting it even further by spraying the surface with water and then dabbing it away in selected areas with an old rag. Yep, we're getting there. I am really liking how aged this finish is becoming. Because I knew I'd be adding so many layers of moisture, I chose to coat everything with the super glue. If you're not going to be engaging in such heavy distressing, that may not be necessary. Here I'm just adding a little bit of metallic wax to the surface of the grill and also just to the tips of the doorknobs. And I'm coming back in with that same dark wash and adding some detailing around the individual panels. And of course, I can't resist adding in some streaks as though rust or other contaminants have dripped down over the surface of this door over the years. A little more detailing underneath both of the doorknobs, and this weathering pass is complete. In the next step, I'll be using a mint green acrylic craft paint applied with a dry brushing method to help call out all of that fine detailed texture that's been created. I just gently skim the brush across the surface, and it magically creates detail that was invisible to the eye before. And yep, I'm splattering with both dark and light washes because you have to have splatter, or I do anyway. Oh, I love that look. And of course, since this is part of our Secret Garden series, there has to be moss. So the very last layer will be to add straight PVA glue and then sprinkle crushed cilantro leaves over the top and gently pat it into place to simulate moss. To seal and protect everything, I'll be turning to one of my favorite top coats, which is Ultra Cover's Matte Clear. I'll just step outside and put a decent coat on both sides of the door. It won't change the matte surface at all. And oops, I almost forgot. Since this is the door to the secret garden, it has to have a keyhole. Now, if I had had my wits about me, I would have built that keyhole into all of the cut files, but I obviously was too excited and rushing. So I do a crude job of creating an aperture that goes all the way through using a pin vise and a scalpel. And then I just create a little bit of a metallic rim by dipping a toothpick into metallic wax and applying it. And that, my friends, is the end of our first Cricut Maker adventure. I hope that you're as excited by the possibilities of this technology as I am. I know that for those of you who feel like this machine is beyond your reach, this may feel discouraging, and I apologize for that. But this is the future, and I am going there. I so hope that you will join me on the journey. Thank you, as always, for hanging out with me today. And until next time, bye.